The world stood on the edge of silence, broken only by the cold wind that cut across the frozen lands in the north. Men wrapped in black cloaks rode through the thick snow, their eyes searching the woods ahead. They belonged to the Night's Watch, sworn to guard the wall and protect the realms of men. But on this night, what they found was not just snow or trees. They found something unnatural. Bodies lay scattered, torn apart in ways no animal could have done. A soldier bent low, fear in his eyes, when suddenly the forest shifted. From the shadows, tall pale figures stepped forward. Their eyes glowed blue, brighter than fire, colder than death. The others had returned. One scream rose, then the silence swallowed it, leaving only the wind. Far to the south, in the castle of Winterfell, Lord Eddard Stark prepared for another day. He was a man of honor, stern and strong, with the cold of the north deep in his voice. His children trained with wooden swords in the yard, their laughter mixing with the steel. The great house of Stark lived by an old truth: winter is coming. And though they did not yet know it, winter was closer than any of them could imagine. A raven came with news from King's Landing. The hand of the king was dead. Robert Baratheon, the great king of the Seven Kingdoms, would ride north to ask Ned Stark to take that place. In the east, across the narrow sea, another story began. A young girl with silver hair stood near the balcony of a foreign palace. Her name was Daenerys, though she was no ordinary girl. She was the last daughter of a fallen house, the Targaryens, once rulers of the Seven Kingdoms. Her brother, Viserys, walked behind her with eyes full of hunger. He spoke of crowns and swords, of armies and fire. But he had no army, no throne. He only had her. And to him, she was not a sister to protect but a tool to use. Viserys dreamed of winning back their kingdom, and for that, he would give her away in marriage to a warlord. His name was Khal Drogo, a man feared by all, a rider of the great Dothraki horde. Daenerys, young and afraid, had no choice. Her brother's word was law. Still, in her heart, something stirred, a spark of strength she did not yet know she had. When King Robert reached Winterfell, the sound of his arrival shook the air. Trumpets called, horses marched, banners of the crowned stag flew high. Robert was no longer the man he had been in youth. His belly was round, his beard thick, but his voice was loud and filled with force. He laughed and embraced Ned like a brother, for once they had fought side by side in war. Yet beneath his laughter, the weight of secrets pressed hard. He asked Ned to be his hand, the second most powerful man in the realm. Ned hesitated, for he loved his home and feared the politics of the South. But loyalty and honor pushed him toward the duty he could not refuse. That night, while feasts filled the hall with music and meat, shadows gathered in hidden corners. Queen Cersei watched with cold green eyes, her golden-haired children by her side. Beside her stood her twin, Jaime Lannister, handsome and proud, but dangerous as a lion. They whispered together, their closeness too sharp to ignore. And above all the noise of the hall, their secret threatened to bring war. For what they guarded was not love, it was treason. The wall stood far in the north, a giant of stone and ice, older than memory. It was there that Jon Snow, Ned's bastard son, dreamed of finding his place. He was young, but his heart was restless, and the cold seemed to call him. The Night's Watch would take him, and in black he would serve. But even he did not yet know what walked beyond that wall. What blue eyes stared from the shadows waiting. The night grew darker in Winterfell. Bran Stark, the boy who loved to climb, ran across towers and walls as if the stones were his playmates. His small hands gripped the edges, his eyes full of joy. But in his climbing, he saw what no boy should ever see. Through a high window, he looked upon Jaime Lannister and Queen Cersei locked together in a forbidden embrace. Their eyes widened when they saw him. Jaime's smile curved, dangerous, as he whispered the words that would echo forever. "The things I do for love." With a single push, Bran fell into the empty air, his cry lost in the wind. In the east, the sun set red over the sea as Daenerys stood before Khal Drogo for the first time. He was tall and fierce, with long hair braided with bells, each one earned in battle. His gaze was heavy, but he said no word. To Daenerys, he was a storm she could not escape. To her brother, he was a weapon to be owned. But the truth, hidden and waiting, was that Daenerys would one day find power not in her brother's hunger, but in her own fire. That night, she felt the chains tighten, but deep inside, a dragon's shadow stirred far away. The others moved in the snow, silent and patient, their eyes bright as the moon. And though no one yet knew it, all stories, the wall, the throne, the girl with silver hair were threads of the same cloth, pulling toward war. Thrones of power would rise and fall, and the game had already begun. Winterfell grew restless in the days after the king's visit. The great hall still echoed with laughter and music, but beneath the joy, heavy matters stirred. Lord Eddard Stark walked the cold stone passages, his mind torn between duty to his family and duty to his king. Robert Baratheon was not just a ruler to him, he was an old friend, a brother in arms from battles long past. Yet the South was full of danger. Lies and whispers were weapons as sharp as swords, and Ned knew he was no master of such games. Still, honor demanded his answer, and his heart told him he could not refuse. Lady Catelyn Stark stood by his side, her eyes worried. She loved her husband, but she feared the South, a place she had left long ago. Then, one night, a raven came bearing a secret message. It was from her sister, Lisa Arryn, widow of the Dead Hand. The message claimed the Lannisters were behind her husband's death. If true, it meant the crown itself was poisoned with treachery. Ned read the words in silence, his jaw hard, for he knew what it meant. Accepting the king's call might bring not honor, but blood. Still, to refuse would shame his family and betray the trust of his king. The weight of choice pressed on him like winter snow. Meanwhile, young Bran lay in his chamber, still and pale. The boy had not died from his fall, though many thought he would not wake. Catelyn sat by his side without sleep, her fingers wrapped around his hand. Outside the chamber, shadows moved. In the dark of night, a man crept inside, his knife glinting. He came to end what Jaime Lannister had begun. But just as the blade neared the boy, Bran's direwolf leapt. With teeth bared and fury in its eyes, the beast tore down the killer. Catelyn, breathless and shaken, knew this was no accident. Someone wanted her son dead, and the danger was greater than she had feared. The Lannisters had secrets worth killing for far across the sea. Daenerys Targaryen began her new life among the Dothraki. The wedding feast had been fierce and wild, with songs of blood and dance of blades. Warriors cheered, horses raced, and gifts were given. Among them, 3 stone eggs, dark and strange, laid in a chest before her. They were said to be dragon eggs, though dragons had been gone for centuries. To most, they were only stone. But when Daenerys touched them, she felt warmth, faint but alive, deep within their shells. She said nothing, yet in her heart, the spark grew stronger. She was no longer just her brother's pawn. Slowly, something inside her began to awaken. Her brother Viserys, however, cared little for her. He dreamed only of Drogo's army, his golden crown, and the throne across the sea. But Drogo was not a man to be controlled. He was silent, proud, and answered to no one. To him, Daenerys was a bride, but not yet a queen. Still, she watched him closely, learning his ways, her fear slowly giving way to quiet strength. For the first time, she began to wonder if her destiny might not be her brother's dream, but her own. At King's Landing, far to the south, other games were already in motion. The Lannisters whispered in halls of gold, their eyes always watching, their hands always reaching. Queen Cersei held the king with soft smiles and quiet words, while Jaime stood ever near her, dangerous and loyal only to her. Their young son Joffrey carried himself with the arrogance of a prince, cruel in spirit, though still a boy. The city, full of secrets, waited for Ned Stark to arrive. And when he did, he would step into a nest of vipers. The wall stood in the cold north, tall and endless. Jon Snow rode with his uncle Benjen to see it, his heart heavy with questions. He was a bastard, a son without a true name, yet he dreamed of finding honor in the Night's Watch. He saw men dressed in black, strong and weak alike, sworn to guard the realm. But beyond that wall, in the endless snow, death had already begun to walk. The others had stirred, and soon the Watch would face enemies no vow could prepare them for. In Winterfell, the choice was made. Ned Stark would ride south with the king, taking his daughters Sansa and Arya with him. The girls were full of hope, dreaming of songs and nights, of a world they had only heard in stories. Sansa longed for Joffrey's hand and golden crown, while Arya cared little for such things, her heart wild and restless like the north itself. Catelyn watched them prepare, her heart heavy. She feared what lay ahead, but she knew nothing could stop it now. The road to King's Landing had begun, and the Game of Thrones was moving faster than any of them could see. And in the stillness of Bran's room, as the dire wolf kept its silent watch, the boy's eyes opened for the first time since his fall. The game had only just begun, and already blood had been spilled, secrets whispered, and fates tied together. Thrones of power would decide the fate of all, and none would escape its reach. The road to the south was long and full of dust. Lord Eddard Stark rode beside King Robert, their banners flying against the summer sky. Behind them, soldiers and servants stretched in a long train of horses and carts. For Robert, the ride was a chance to remember old battles and old friends. He spoke of wars they had fought together, of victories won and enemies crushed. But beneath his laughter, his face carried a shadow. The king was not blind to the danger of his own court. He trusted Ned to be his hand not only because of their friendship, but because he knew the crown was heavy and full of poison. "You are the only man I can trust," Robert said one night as the fire burned between them. Ned nodded, but in his heart, he feared what those words truly meant. Back in Winterfell, Catelyn Stark had little peace. Her husband had gone south, her son lay wounded, and whispers filled the air. Maester Luwin urged her to stay strong, but Catelyn's worry only grew. Then, a visitor came, Petyr Baelish, called Littlefinger. He was sly, with sharp eyes and a smile that never told the full truth. He had been her childhood friend, but now he carried news from the capital. He spoke of plots, of knives in the dark, of enemies who moved unseen. Though his words were wrapped in charm, Catelyn felt unease. Still, she listened, for in those whispers lay warnings of what waited for Ned. Beyond the wall, the snow stretched endless. Jon Snow and his uncle Benjen rode among the men of the Night's Watch. The wall itself was like nothing Jon had ever seen, towering cold and endless, a wall of ice that reached the sky. He looked upon it with awe, yet also with fear, for he knew what had been seen in the woods. The men of the Watch were not all knights and lords. Many were thieves, murderers, and broken men, forced to serve. But once they swore their vows, they were brothers, and Jon would be among them. Still, whispers carried from the north strange sightings. Dead men walking, eyes of blue fire. Few believed, but those who had seen knew death was already awake. Far across the narrow sea, Daenerys Targaryen learned the ways of her new world. The Dothraki rode like the wind, their braids long and their eyes sharp. They were fierce, wild, and loyal only to strength. At first, she felt small, lost in a sea of warriors who spoke a tongue she barely understood. But slowly, she began to find her place. Her husband, Khal Drogo, spoke little, but his presence was like thunder. She feared him, yet she studied him, and with each day, her courage grew. She learned to ride with the horde, her silver hair streaming in the sun, her eyes beginning to burn with quiet fire. For the first time, she no longer felt like her brother's pawn. Something inside her was changing, something strong, something unbreakable. Viserys, however, grew restless. He walked among the Dothraki with arrogance, demanding respect he had not earned. They laughed at him, their eyes mocking, their hands resting on the hilts of their blades. To them, he was not a dragon, he was a fool. But in his heart, Viserys still dreamed of his crown, a crown of gold and fire, and he believed Daenerys would deliver it. He could not yet see that the world was already shifting away from his hands. In King's Landing, the heart of the realm, shadows thickened. The city was a place of beauty and rot, where golden towers rose above narrow streets filled with hunger. Within the Red Keep, the Lannisters moved like lions, their power sharp and dangerous. Queen Cersei whispered to her brother Jaime, their bond deeper than blood. Their secret brand's fall burned between them like a hidden flame. They feared discovery, for if their truth came to light, it would tear the kingdom apart. Yet their pride kept them blind. Jaime wore his armor with ease, smiling as if the world itself bowed to him, while Cersei's eyes watched everyone, seeking threats that might strike her children. Robert, meanwhile, drank and feasted, but the matters of the realm slipped through his fingers. His council ruled in his place, men with their own games to play. Lord Varys, soft-spoken and full of secrets, whispered like a shadow. Lord Renly, Robert's brother, smiled with charm, but hid his ambitions. And above them all, the Iron Throne sat heavy, sharp with its steel blades, a reminder that no king sat easy. Far in Winterfell, Bran stirred. His dreams were strange, filled with falling, flying, and shadows of wolves. He could not yet walk, but his eyes had opened, and his silence carried weight. He remembered nothing of the fall, yet his presence was a reminder of danger. His wolf, ever close, watched with fierce loyalty, as if it too sensed what lay ahead. The game moved on. In the north, in the south, across the sea, threads of power tightened, pulling men and women into its snare. Honor, love, fear, and hunger, all drove them toward the storm that waited. Thrones of power were not just chairs of wood or stone. They were choices, secrets, and betrayals. And already, the cost was being written in blood. The capital city of King's Landing rose before Lord Eddard Stark like a beast of stone and gold. Its walls were high, its towers gleamed, but its streets smelled of sweat and secrets. He entered with his daughters, Sansa and Arya, each with eyes wide in wonder. To Sansa, the city was a dream come true. Knights in shining armor, ladies in silk, songs sung in gardens. To Arya, it was a cage, a place where swords were hidden by words, where she longed to break free. Ned watched them both and felt the weight of his choice. The city was not the north. Here, honor could be a weakness, and lies were sharper than steel. Inside the Red Keep, the court gathered. Golden pillars rose high, banners of the stag hung heavy, and whispers carried across marble floors. Ned took his place as Hand of the King, seated beside Robert. But even on that first day, he felt the danger. Men on the council smiled, but their eyes measured him. Petyr Baelish, called Littlefinger, welcomed him with playful words, though Ned knew his tongue was sharper than his blade. Varys, the spider, spoke soft and low, his hands folded, but his words slid like smoke. These were men who thrived in shadows, and Ned, a man of the north, knew he had walked into a pit. Queen Cersei stood beside her children, her face calm, her voice smooth. To the court, she was the picture of grace, but in her heart, fire burned. She feared what Ned might learn, for every step he took brought him closer to her secret. Jaime, ever near her, smiled as if nothing mattered, his golden armor bright in the sun. Yet behind that smile, danger coiled. The twins were lions, and lions did not forgive. Far away, beyond the sea, Daenerys Targaryen's life was changing. Each day she rode with the Dothraki, her silver hair streaming, her eyes sharp. She learned their tongue, their ways, their strength. No longer was she only a frightened girl. She grew into a woman the horde began to respect. At night, she sat by Khal Drogo, her fear turning to understanding, her voice gaining courage. The dragon egg sat close, cold stone to others, but warm in her hands. She held them, dreamed of fire, and in those dreams, dragons flew again. Slowly, she began to see herself not as her brother's pawn, but as something greater. A queen, a mother of dragons. Viserys, however, did not change. He burned with envy, watching the respect grow around his sister while he was mocked. His words grew sharper, his hands cruel. But each insult, each bruise, only hardened Daenerys. She no longer bent to him. The power he believed was his by birth was slipping, and he did not yet see it. To him, the throne across the sea was his destiny. To Daenerys, destiny was beginning to whisper a different truth. North of the Wall, snow fell heavy as Jon Snow trained with the Brothers of the Watch. The cold bit his skin, the wind tore his breath, but he stood tall. He was not yet a man, but his skill with the sword set him apart. Still, he learned the Watch was not full of lords and knights. It was full of broken men-thieves, cowards, and lost souls. Yet in their eyes, he saw something familiar. They were bound by the same oath, by the same black cloak, and that made them brothers. His heart longed for honor, but his eyes began to see the truth. The Wall was not a place of glory. It was a place of sacrifice. And beyond its edge, death was stirring. Back in Winterfell, Bran grew restless in his bed. Though his body was weak, his spirit was fierce. He dreamed of wolves running through the forest, of shadows that whispered his name. His direwolf stayed close, its golden eyes always watching, its growl warning of danger. Catelyn, still at his side, felt the weight of fear. The assassin's knife, the Lannister's silence, each piece told her one truth. War was creeping closer, hidden beneath smiles and silk. Ned, far to the south, began to pull at threads. He looked into the death of the old hand, Jon Arryn. He read his books, questioned his servants, and listened to the whispers of the city. Again and again, he found the same shadow. The truth lay with the children of the Queen, with the blood that ran in their veins. It was a truth too dangerous to speak, but one that would decide the fate of kingdoms. For if Robert ever learned it, the realm itself might bleed. And in the deep woods beyond the Wall, pale figures moved silently. Their blue eyes glowed, their swords cold as death. The others walked again, patient and waiting. And though no horn was blown, no raven sent, their presence was a storm that would one day fall upon all. The days in King's Landing grew heavy for Ned Stark. The heat of the South pressed on him, but it was not the sun that troubled him, it was the whispers. Every scroll he read, every word he heard, led him closer to a dark truth. Jon Arryn, the former Hand, had died for asking questions. And those questions were the same ones Ned now asked. Why had Jon studied the Book of Lineages? Why had he searched through the names of families, fathers and sons? Slowly, Ned saw a pattern, one that pointed toward the Queen's children. Their golden hair shone bright like the Lannisters, but Robert's blood was dark, strong, and carried by every child he had fathered. The truth grew sharper with every page. If Robert's sons were not truly his, then the throne itself stood on a lie. At the same time, the Lannisters watched Ned with careful eyes. Cersei moved like a queen of grace, but her words were blades. Jaime laughed at court, his golden armor shining, but his heart guarded his secret with iron. Even young Joffrey, proud and cruel, carried himself as if the realm already bowed to him. To Ned, the danger was clear. Yet honor held him still. He would not strike without proof, but proof came closer with every step. In the north, Winterfell prepared for change. Robb Stark, now the young lord in his father's absence, felt the weight of command. He was young but carried his father's strength. The direwolves grew with the children, fierce and loyal, their presence a silent warning. Rumors of war stirred in the taverns, for the realm sensed the cracks forming in the crown. Catelyn, moved by fear for her son Bran and her husband far away, traveled to the capital herself. She carried the knife used against Bran, believing it might reveal the hand behind the crime. When she showed it to Littlefinger, he claimed it belonged to Tyrion Lannister, the Queen's brother. Whether truth or trick, the claim set fire to her heart. She now believed the Lannisters meant to destroy her family. The storm gathered, though none could yet see how far it would spread beyond the sea. Daenerys Targaryen began to shine with power. No longer afraid, she walked among the Dothraki as their Khaleesi, their queen. The warriors bowed their heads to her, the women listened to her words, and even Drogo's gaze softened with pride. She learned their tongue, she gave them commands, and they obeyed. Viserys, seeing this, grew jealous. His anger burned, his hands shaking, his words sharp. He struck her once, but when he did, she stood tall and fierce. Her voice carried over the firelight, and the warriors obeyed her, not him. For the first time, Viserys felt the truth. He was no dragon. The fire was not his. It was hers. That night, Daenerys held the dragon eggs close. The flames of the fire lit her silver hair, her eyes deep and strong. She dreamed of wings, of fire, of creatures lost to time. She awoke with her hands warm, the shells glowing faintly in the night. She said nothing, but the truth stirred in her heart. Dragons were not dead. Not truly. And their fire lived in her blood. At the wall, Jon Snow took his vows among the brothers of the Watch. He placed his hand upon the weirwood tree, its red leaves whispering in the wind, and spoke the words that bound him for life. I am the sword in the darkness, the watcher on the walls. Yet even as he spoke, shadows crept beyond the wall. Scouts returned with strange tales, dead men found in the snow. And when burned, their bodies screamed. The brothers grew uneasy, but their vows held them. Jon stood among them, his wolf ghost at his side, his heart heavy with purpose. He felt the storm coming, though he could not yet name it. In King's Landing, Sansa dreamed of golden crowns and fair princes, her heart blind to danger. Arya trained in secret, her wild spirit clashing with the world of silks and lies. The two sisters walked the same halls but saw two different worlds. Yet both were caught in the same net, woven by secrets that would soon tighten. Ned, standing before the Iron Throne, stared at the blades twisted into its frame. Each sword was a story of conquest, of blood and fire. And as he looked, he understood this was not a seat of honor. It was a seat of power, sharp and cruel. To sit upon it was to risk everything. And those who reached for it, more often than not, bled. And far away in the frozen woods, the others walked silently. Their blue eyes pierced the night, their steps leaving no sound. They carried blades of ice, and with them came death. The wall stood tall, but even stone and ice could not stop what was already awake. The realm played its game, blind to the true enemy waiting beyond the snow. The Game of Thrones tightened its grip on every corner of the realm. In King's Landing, Ned Stark walked through halls where every word was a trap. He uncovered more truths with each day, and the pieces began to form a whole. Jon Arryn had died because he had discovered the secret of the Queen's children. They were not Robert's heirs. Their golden hair was the mark of the Lannisters, of Jaime and Cersei, and not of the king. Ned carried this truth like a sword hidden under his cloak, knowing it could save the realm or destroy it. One evening, Robert hunted in the forests outside the city, his laughter echoing through the trees, but the weight of his crown showed in his weary steps. He trusted Ned without question, yet he never saw how near the danger truly lay. Cersei, watching from the shadows, already moved her pieces. She knew the Northmen had seen too much. Jaime smiled at her side, his hand always on his sword, while Joffrey strutted with the arrogance of a king not yet crowned. In their golden pride, They believed the game was theirs. Far in the east, Daenerys Targaryen rose higher with each passing day. She rode with the Dothraki, her voice strong, her gaze unyielding. The Horde now looked to her as much as to Drogo. She was no longer her brother's pawn, but a queen in her own right. Viserys still dreamed of his crown, but when his hand struck too far, the Dothraki laughed at his weakness. In the end, he met the fate he had demanded. His crown of gold was given, molten and cruel, burning away his lies. Daenerys watched with steady eyes, and when it was done, she knew the truth. The dragon was not him. The dragon was her. The eggs glowed faintly by the fire that night, and the whispers of wings filled her dreams. Beyond the wall, Jon Snow faced his first true taste of the darkness. The bodies of men who had died returned with eyes like blue fire, walking with no breath, no soul. The brothers of the Watch fought, their blades breaking against icy skin, their courage tested by horror. Jon's direwolf, Ghost, tore into the shadows, his white fur stained red with death. When the dawn came, the corpses lay still, but the fear did not fade. The others were real, and the wall was all that stood between them and the realm. Jon looked to the endless snow and knew the fight ahead would be unlike anything men had faced. In Winterfell, Bran dreamed again of wolves and shadows. Though still weak in body, his spirit reached far, touching things beyond the world of men. His direwolf growled at unseen enemies, standing guard as if it sensed what was yet to come. Catelyn, far away in the south, held on to her fear, for every step she took only tangled her family deeper into the game. The knife, the Lannisters, the whispers all pointed to war. Ned, torn between truth and mercy, finally stood before Queen Cersei in the gardens of the Red Keep. The air was heavy, the scent of roses sharp. He told her he knew her secret, that her children were not Robert's. He urged her to flee, to take them and run before Robert learned the truth. But Cersei only smiled, her eyes cold as steel. "When you play the Game of Thrones," she said softly, "you win or you die. There is no middle ground." Ned felt the weight of those words, and he knew the storm was already upon them. The season turned. Across the sea, Daenerys placed her hand upon a dragon egg, feeling life stir beneath the stone. In the frozen north, blue eyes shone in the night as the others marched silently forward. In the south, the Iron Throne stood waiting, sharp and cruel, ready to cut all who reached for it. And in Winterfell, the words of the Starks whispered like the wind through the trees. Winter is coming. The threads of kings and queens, of wolves and dragons, of snow and fire, all pulled tighter. The first moves of the great game had been played. Blood had already been spilled, secrets uncovered, and power claimed. The thrones of power stood ready, and the realm would never be the same again.